There is a massive movement happening within the longevity and aging landscape. It turns out there is much we can do to extend our lifespan and reverse the effects of aging. What we've been taught and led to believe about aging and human disease are now outdated and no longer accurate. That means it's time to change the current mainstream paradigm and have different kinds of conversations when it comes to our well-being. And it's time to recognize that we have the power within ourselves to dictate and drive our own health span and aging journey. Hi, I'm Suzaida Hippolito, host of Timeless Vitality, where we are redefining aging so we become truly timeless. I'm willing to bet that many of you can relate to this challenge. One of the major challenges I've had to overcome in my life is all the negative self-talk that used to be so loud in my head. It was so loud that it caused me depression, anxiety, and this angst where I constantly felt like I was never good enough for anything. I believed I wasn't smart enough, that I wasn't capable. I also believed that my memory sucked and there was not much I can do about it. Then I started meditating. I also started doing trauma healing. I quickly realized that all that negativity was all in my head. And it was only true to the extent that I believed it or that I allowed it to be true. So then I began to understand the power of our minds. Later, I would get introduced to this technology called BrainTap, a distinctly designed brain training platform that activates the brain's neuroplasticity. Now, I use BrainTap 1 to 2, maybe 3 times a day to rewire my brain for positivity, high performance, to achieve my goals and all the things. As of August 2023, there have been more than 7 million sessions played with BrainTap. We are privileged to have with us here today the founder of BrainTap, Dr. Patrick Porter. For decades, Dr. Patrick Porter has been on the cutting edge of brain entrainment technology. He has revolutionized brain fitness and lifestyle improvements with this technology using the powers of our mind. He is a highly sought after expert within neuroscience and the personal development industries. He is an acclaimed neuroscientist, entrepreneur, an award-winning best-selling author who has given more than 500 keynotes all around the world. Dr. Porter's mission is to better 1 billion brains so that we live in a world where you think better, sleep better, and perform better. Yes, 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 yes. You're well on your way to that, to reaching 1 billion, Dr. Porter. You're in the multi-millions now. How does that feel?
Feels great. Yeah, and we're going in March to India. We're opening up India. We just formed a company there, and we've got a partnership with the group that runs Bollywood. They own 95% of the music. We're going to be converting a lot of the spiritual healing music into brain tap music that you can meditate to. So we think it's going to take off really well. They think they can get me 1 billion brains alone just in India. So we'll see what happens. We'll see.
Does that mean you're going to have to adjust your goal to maybe another 2 billion?
Hey, somebody said, however many, I think every person can operate and optimize their brain function. And if that happens, we're going to have a very different world. Like you said, we're unfortunately, our brains have a propensity because of genetic training. Really, it's from our ancestors. It wasn't long ago, we were fighting for survival, in the scope of the universe, right? I mean, in our lives, of course, we really haven't hit that pressure, but our genes don't know that. Our biological system is still looking to preserve us. And that's what our subconscious mind does 100% of the time. So we can get caught up in that negative programming. And that's what we have to shift. We have to shift more to a more optimized thinking and get our body just functioning on that higher level.
Okay, I want to pause on that topic and go back to it in a moment. First of all, I'd love for our audience to learn, how did you get into the area of neuroscience or learning how to harness the power of the mind? What was the beginning of all of that?
Well, actually, it happened when I was a kid. My dad was an alcoholic, and he got help with something called the Silva method, which is a meditation process that was approved by the Catholic Church. And so when Father Fitzpatrick and Sister Barbara came over and said, Michael, we're going to help you to stop drinking. We're going to teach you how to relax. Of course, he laughed. He didn't think that was going to happen. But one seminar, and he realized that when he meditated, they have something called the Silva sound, which is a nice chronic tone, and they were playing in the background. He came home, and it was the first time he had ever relaxed that he could remember that wasn't drug induced, didn't use alcohol. And then he became an avid meditator, taught us how to do it. I was a very troubled second grader at the time, and I was held back in second grade. I jokingly say Sister Barbara liked me so much she wanted me in her class twice. But I was smarter than I believed I was, because I was held back because I wanted to be an artist. I didn't want to do schoolwork. But then my dad taught me through meditation to visualize my end result, my goals. And then I became an honor roll student in what I'm doing today. And it just I wasn't really going to do this. But I was helping my dad growing up, helping my dad do seminars. Then when I got a little older, going to college for electronics, I would still help my dad. And then I realized that I loved electronics as kind of a pastime, but my real passion is helping people. And so I was able to do them both when I joined a company called Light and Sound Research, and we developed the first portable light and sound machine way back, maybe before you were born, in '86. And during that time, of course, we were looked at like we were aliens from another planet, because we didn't have cell phones or CDs I remember we just came out with cassettes. So we had no sound with it. And then I became the voice of the MC Square, because we called it MC Square, was the very first portable light and sound machine. And then now we're on our 16th different device that we've created over the years. This is version 6 of BrainTap, and I think we have some other, we're just continuing to expand. Neuroscience wasn't even around. When somebody said you go to school for neuroscience, that wasn't even in the curriculum. There was no EEG machines that you could get in if you weren't in the hospital. So we would use skin temperature, respiration, heart rate. They called it biofeedback then, not neurofeedback. And then, but in the 2000s really is when the transition happened, when they realized that the brain could change. When you introduced me, you said neuroplasticity. That was not even a thing before 2000. People thought, and if you go back and find books, they would tell you that they believed that if you were born a carpenter, you had a carpenter's brain. If you were born a scientist, you had a scientist's brain. Now we know that's not true at all, that you can retrain the brain at any age. Like you said, your only limits are those you place in consciousness. So if we can upgrade our consciousness by I call it vibrational learning, because when you sit in meditation and you get into that alpha theta state, we receive information. You receive insights about your life. You get clarity about your mission. You start to realize that life is meant to be lived, not to, squander and just hold on to grudges. The worst thing, there's a really good book when I was growing up, first in practice. It was called You Can't Afford the Luxury of a Negative Thought. And it's so true, because we now know those negative thoughts actually destroy us from the inside out. So we want to be more optimistic, more positive, keep our immune system at the highest level of function. And I think we're learning that the brain has a lot to do with all of that. It has everything to do with it, but before we didn't know that.
And yeah, so it's no longer just about thinking positively to think positively. There's actually a physiological, a biochemical reaction that happens in the body when we train our brain to think positively. So can you tell us more about the biochemical reactions that happens with the
Sure.
negative thinking and the positive thinking?
Sure. They've known this since ancient times, ancient traditions, 5,000 years ago, when the Buddha said, "He who angers you conquers you." Now, medical science knows in order for you to have an angry, negative thought about a person, You have to conjure that up in your own mind. To do that, you have to have chemical reactions that happen that literally destroy you from the inside out. So while you're thinking hatred, that's why they said hatred is the poison that destroys the person who's angry. So when Jesus 2,000 years ago said, hey, love your enemy, what he was really saying, and medical science has proved this. We did a study in India with 75,000 people. And in front of the whole group, what we did is we put EEG on people and our neuro check, and they did something called heartfelt meditation. So imagine sitting in meditation, you and I are sitting across from each other, and I'm visualizing light energy coming from my heart. Now, most people don't know this, but they can measure the photic exchange in our cells. Every person emits 8-10 nanometer light. So you're a light generator. So if you're an optimistic thinker, you actually generate 200 times more light energy from the cells of your body than someone who's a pessimist. So what they thought the person receiving the energy, so they have 3 or 4 people projecting energy to this person who's going to be healed. When we measured the mitochondrial health and energy of the cells of the people doing the study, the person who was generating the energy toward the transmitter actually was getting a greater benefit than the person getting the treatment. So when you pray for other people, it's a very altruistic thing to do, and it's good. But the reality is you're actually healing yourself because you're sending it. That's why affirmations work, and things like this when you're visualizing them. So physiologically, what happens is the most powerful pharmacy on earth is not in the corner drugstore. It's between your 2 ears. That 6 inches of real estate is the most powerful place for you. And if you can activate those neurochemicals, you can feel happy or you can feel sad. It depends on what you want to dwell on. There's the old saying, fake it till you make it. So and we all know people that there's 2 ways to do it. I always say, number 1 is you cannot think a bad diet. So you got to have a good diet. You can't eat junk food. That lowers your energy, right? When you're eating a lot of sugar and a lot of junk food, your energy level goes down. But if you're eating healthy food, now your brain has the capacity to do it. So that's number 1. You cannot think a bad diet. So number 2, you got to move and breathe. There was a statistic that I just read, and they've been talking about it for years, but they did a study that showed 20 minutes of sitting is equivalent to smoking a single cigarette and will reduce your life expectancy by 3 minutes. Now, we know that if you sit for 2 hours, you've limited the oxygen to the brain by 10%. That means your brain goes into DEFCON 4. It thinks you're suffocating. You're just sitting. That's why standing and doing things at your computer is so good. And then number 3, we need to do some kind of brain fitness. And that's not doing puzzles and things like that. It's how we would do this if we were in ancient times. A casual day would be, we would wake up in the morning from the light of the sun. It would wake us up. Our brain would have the norepinephrine, the cortisol, the dopamine reaction. We would jump out of bed. We would have to go start foraging. We would walk around nature. So if we're around a body of water, our body would mirror that body of water. We would start the alpha cycle. If we go to the mountains, we'd start the 7.8 hertz frequency. We'd start the theta cycle. At night, when we come back to the tribe to show them what we found or what we hunted and whatever we did, we would sit by a fire. Most people don't realize that when you have an open fire, and this happened to me when I was in Ames, Bhopal in India, when Dr. Varun told me, he says, you're cheating because we took a guru up on stage, we did a brain map with them, and then I took somebody who'd never meditated and I had them have the same brain pattern. And I said, you don't have to take 30 years anymore. We have technology that can do that. And he said, well, that's cheating. And I said, Varun, have you ever meditated to a candle? And he said, oh yeah, all the time. I said, when you have a candle burning like you're taking a bath or you're just relaxing, that candle flickers at 10 hertz frequency. So every cell of your body has a mirror neuron, which means that the environment is actually influencing your brain's activity. And what it's doing is when you're in the alpha cycle, you're going to have acetylcholine, which makes you feel good. That's why when you're around people you love or you appreciate or you're comfortable with, you start to generate these natural neurochemicals. And if you're at a romantic getaway and you start a fire, you might get lucky, because everybody's you're basically getting high on your own supply and your body is flickering at that. And in ancient times, we didn't go get another log to put on the fire. When the fire burned out, now that fire is also emitting infrared light while it's burning. So just like red light therapy for those people out there that do like biohacking and they're using red light therapy before they go to bed, this is something they've done since the dawn of history. And one fact that I love about India, since I've been working with them over the years, is in the Vedas, they talked about mental health and they had something called chronos therapy. And of course, chronos therapy in ancient times is very different than it is today, meaning light therapy. What they would tell you, if you had a mental disorder, they would have you get up 2 hours before sunrise and sit outside because there's more infrared light hitting the planet 2 hours before sunrise than any other time of the day. Now, how did they know that? There's something, it's like everything's being relearned again, and we're taking these ancient traditions or making these modern technology. And that's what we did with BrainTap, why we have the red and blue light in the ears, is to imitate sunrises and sunsets. The body does, and we're using frequencies that match those. So the body doesn't realize that it's not there because the body doesn't think like we think on a conscious level. It basically responds through vibration to what's happening around it. That's why it's very important that we hang out with gainers instead of drainers in our life. If you're hanging around with people that drain you of your energy, they're probably those negative, pessimistic people, and they literally will be like energy vampires. We all have friends like that, or they could even be family members. We can't get rid of them. They walk in the room, it gets a little darker. You want to be the person that walks in the room and gets a little brighter.
Wow. Well, now there's so much there. You touched on so much of where it sounds like we're going back to. So if this is how the ancients did it without all this technology, and then somewhere along the way, we lost touch with that. And you say we're relearning that. So one of the ways you're bringing it back within the context of our current human ecosystem is with the BrainTap headphones. I see it right behind you. Is that something you can pull out and kind of share?
I'll show you right. I have one over here that's that one's not charged, but this one is. This is what I use. I have a little zero gravity chair over here in my office. So we have a whole clinic here, but I don't want to fight for the chair. So when you open it up, you can see here the lights in the ears. That red and blue light is actually flickering at different frequencies. Every 2 minutes, it changes to a different Nogier frequency. Dr. Nogier is the person who's responsible for something called auricular therapy. And we were having doctors use lasers on auricular points or meridians in the ears that would maybe help them stop smoking or lose weight or get rid of pain. And I thought, well, with photobiomodulation, all we need to do is bathe the ear. So we did some testing with autistic children, and we could broadcast 187 hertz frequency pulsing light, and these kids would just pass out. Because what it does, it turns off the sympathetic drive, that fight or flight, and turns on your parasympathetic system. So it's part of every system now. You don't need to be autistic to use it, but basically they don't understand things the way that we do. But now we have all of the Nogier frequencies, or 7 of them, and they repeat. In the eyes, this isn't going right now. I'd have to turn on the thing, but there's 8 LEDs. This is called retinal flashing. So what we know, when somebody says, I don't meditate, I try to meditate, the average person, unfortunately, only 5% of people that start meditating continue. And that's because their monkey mind gets in the way. And when you close your eyes to meditate, you shut down 30% of your brain if you don't activate the visual cortex. So when we use the retinal flashing, we're actually flashing at Earth frequencies. The Earth itself has a frequency between, if we were on a spaceship going toward Earth and we were to measure the frequency of the planet, it'd be between 0.5 and 100. So if we're in a mountaintop, that's 7.8. That happens to be theta. So theta happens to trigger something called GABA. GABA is a precursor to DMT. So when somebody says they had a mountaintop experience, that DMT gives them a spiritual experience. And it's just something that's part of our vernacular, right? We talk about it all the time, but it's because it's a truism of what we do. When people go near the ocean and say, oh, I love the ocean, that's because they're triggering alpha, 10 hertz frequency. And if there was a volcano going off, it would be a very high frequency, maybe 75 to 80 to 90, and we'd want to get out of there because the agitation, it would cause our body to, when you see, or as children, a lot of times children will feel their parents fighting. Or as we get older, we might say, I can feel the tension in the room because there's a kind of a frequency to that. And so what we're doing now with the light is the number one thing, but we also have just the app alone. So a lot of those 7 million sessions were listened to with just the app. And we've proven, like in our sleep study in Australia, where we took coal miners that don't see the light of day, they don't have any circadian rhythm. And by the way, when we did our washout, the average worker was in bed 10 hours a day, but they only got 1 minute, less than 2 minutes on average of deep sleep a night. So it doesn't matter the length of time you're in bed. You need at least 1 hour of deep sleep to open up the gliolymphomic system, which is the lymph system, or think of it as the garbage man of the system. It's what pulls the toxins out of the brain. If you don't get that level 4 sleep, you're not detoxing. So what we know the brain tap does in all the studies we've done, and we've done a lot of them, we have, as we're sitting here today, there's 17 studies going on in universities around the world. In there, from things like Parkinson's to learning, to helping nurses to overcome stress, to we're doing it in the classroom. We just had 100 schools come online in India, and they're setting up brain tap rooms throughout, so that we call it brain prep for school. So if you get the brain ready to learn, we learn better and faster and easier instead of going into the classroom stressed out and worried. So the whole thing, we use light, we use sound. There's 3 different sound frequencies in there. One is frequency based called right frequencies. There's Noget frequencies. We have binaural beats and isochronic tones. And those work together in a symphony of different activities. Now, the proprietary mix that we did, that's what I've been developing since the 80s. And then we have music. The music is super important. There's something called the Mozart effect that your listeners can, go research. But what they proved was if you play classical Baroque music, like from the Mozart time period, your brain just works better. Now, it doesn't have to be, we don't use that Baroque classical music, but it's the beat and the frequency of the music. And so we use music that literally trains the brain to get into that super learning state, because we all have it. It's inherent. It's part of our nature. I mean, can you imagine? I still remember, and I wrote this in one of my books, the book Awaken the Genius. There's a chapter in there where my dad, after he got better, he became a psychologist as well. And when he was seeing a person, and the young man was coming in for learning disabilities, and the parent said that the teacher had told him that he wasn't smart enough to learn Spanish. And my dad said, well, go back to the teacher and tell him to teach your son what the dumb kids learn in Spain, because obviously they know how to speak Spanish. So it's not about, the whole thing about our school and the way we learn is totally wrong. A lot of people think we don't have, all kids are geniuses. Everyone has genius potential. They might not be able to learn from you or from your style, but if we can teach them correctly, whether they're kinesthetic learners, auditory learners, or visual learners, the brain will absorb, assimilate, and digest that information. When you're talking about memory, we know that every person on earth has a perfect memory. It's the recall system that needs help, right? Because with neurosurgery, we know we can touch any part or region of the brain, and you'll have a full sensory memory of something you might not even recall, like something that happened when you were 4 years old, and it was just a random memory. But they can trigger that because your brain chemically encodes all memories. And even beyond what you're seeing, hearing, and experiencing, there's almost like we take a 360-degree memory of everything. I mean, 100% of everything we're experiencing, up to the point where they did one study where someone was talking about a conversation that was happening 3 tables away from them. And they had perfect recall of it when they were doing the brain surgery. So we have this incredible brain, and our mind. Think of the brain as the hardware, like the computer interface, and the mind is the software. And we could have the world's greatest computer, but if we don't have the right software to run it, it doesn't matter. So we need to upgrade our software. So that's why, we know that optimistic thinkers And this was a study done also just after COVID, when they showed that optimistic thinkers we have something called the psychoimmune system, which means our psychology affects our immunity. So when we're optimistic, our immune system functions better than if we're pessimistic. And we also know that when we're optimistic, we turn on the genes that get our body to operate at the highest level of efficiency, peak performers. And if we're pessimistic, it downgrades our genetics. And basically, like Henry Ford said, if you think you can and you think you can't, you're right. And they're proving that now with science, that basically the core things that we think about affect everything, right down to our physiology, to our psychology, to our, the biology of who we are. That's why I love Bruce Lipton's book, Biology of Belief. And he talked about it, 15 years ago.
Wow, there's so much in there to illustrate truly how powerful our minds are and how much we know very little how to use our minds. And thank goodness for your work and your technology. You're really, truly helping us understand how to harness that power. Now, earlier you mentioned something about genetic training, that there's something genetically that we've like continue to carry on, and there's a cycle around that. And this is what I'm saying about the cycle. There's a cycle around that that's now being broken. Tell us about the genetic training. I think that's what you said, because I know that we seem to think that the way what goes on in our minds, obviously, like many of us believe that that's how it's supposed to be until we don't believe, until we start getting into work like this.
Right. Well, one of the amazing things about everything we're discovering, it's already been discovered. The Hopi Indians believed that 7 generations affected them, forwards and backwards. So guess what the genetic scientists now say? 7 generations are affecting you, forward and backwards. So if you change today and you have a child, we know that you're genetically, there's a quantum entanglement with that person. So the genes are there, they might not express, but they're there. So that's why in psychotherapy now, there's a lot where they go and heal your ancestors. And they're proving that whether real or imagined, they're getting a positive result in them now. And so I've got to believe it's true. So what that means is that when you were born, you inherited all of the genetic memories of your mom and dad at the moment of conception, and their mom and dad at the moment of their conception, their mom and dad going back 7 generations. So all that history, we weren't born with a blank slate. In fact, they proved this in neuroscience. When you're born, you're actually totally wired. Your brain is totally wired up. And as we learn, we unplug the brain. We don't plug it in. Like people think we're organizing the brain. No, we figure out what we do and then we unwire. For instance, I don't know, do you speak more than one language?
I do. Mm-hmm.
Okay,
yes.
So by speaking more than one language, you have a circuit in your brain that stayed active. For people that don't speak more than one language, that circuit shuts down at 7 years old. My science officer, Dr. Sidral, he's from Brazil, he speaks 6 languages. We were going through India, the 3rd week there, he starts talking to somebody in Hindi. And I said, Francisco, when did you learn Hindi? He goes, we've been here for 3 weeks. He basically is like a universal translator, because the circuit that learns languages, when we were kids, we didn't sit down with a book and memorize nouns and verbs and adjectives and all that. We basically absorbed a language in a state of the mind called theta. Theta is a state called hypermnesia. That part of the brain, if it stays active, stays working. So that's why it's so important as children, or if you have children, is to keep them imagining, creative, doing different things. Don't get them so robotic that because the more robotic you are, the more you just keep doing the same things. The brain just keeps unwiring until, we all know older people that they might even still be working, and they drive home, they stop by the same store, get the same 6-pack, watch the same news, eat the same dinner, pass out in front of the same chair, get up and rinse and repeat. That's the worst thing for the brain. We should be taking different ways home, eating different meals, getting in organizations, having conversations. We're social. We need to really stress out the brain in positive ways, like playing games and communicating and talking and basically, and we're very tactile. So especially if you're not, being away from people, that's why hugging is so important, or especially if you're a kinesthetic learner, you've got to have that part. The brain will start to suffer, and that's where depression and anxiety and fear come in, because the energy wants to move. We're energy beings. I tell people we live in an energy economy, and it all starts with the brain. If the brain's full of energy, it puts that energy down through the body. In fact, the reason that we promote yoga and Tai Chi and things like that is the spine. The ancient tradition is that the spine is the keyboard of the brain. In fact, the rishis say you're only as young as your spine is flexible. So that's because if you're not getting the right information from here down to the rest of the body, when you talked earlier about mental health, I believe we have a physiological crisis in our world, not a psychological crisis. To give you an example, I'm not a chiropractor, but if you research chiropractic, and the founder of chiropractic, Dr. Palmer, he did most of his research on mental patients. 60% of the people he would treat were no longer mentally ill because he corrected their physiology. In psychology, which is my background, unfortunately, there's no study that I've been able to see that's more than 12% effective. The placebo is 40%, which means they're talking people out of the change. So talking about a problem does not solve the problem. It might be good for you to do it, to get it out and talk about it, but then you got to get over it. If you keep talking about it, they call it in psychology revivification. So it means you revive it, you bring it back to life. So if you continue to talk about your problems, you give them energy and you give them strength. So you want to talk about, so what I tell people is, well, what would you do differently? How would you see it differently? What would you have said differently? Start thinking about options and give your brain options, because if it doesn't have an option, it becomes almost like a phobia. You get triggered. In other words, somebody says, oh, you got triggered, or you go, you're pressing my buttons. Well, my kids know that I told them, I said, never give your remote control to another person. They don't have to press the button for happiness or anger or frustration. You just take your control back. You're the one who controls your own state of consciousness, but that takes practice, right? And you got to be disciplined, because it's a lot easier just to let life happen to you instead of through you. But life is conspiring with you for your success if you go with the flow. But if you don't, there's a lot of reasons for life not to work. And if you're focusing on those, you'll find them. But there's also a lot of reasons to make life work for you. And I think that when people start really meditating, like you said, you were doing this mindfulness practice or brain tap or something like that, you start to realize from a bigger perspective, a higher perspective, that you have choices. And as long as you have choices, you have flow. And that flow state is what we really crave as humans.
Yes, I love the flow state. Now, you mentioned the buttons for happiness and such getting triggered. What about the buttons for reverse aging and longevity? How would you describe the work that you're doing with the brain tap and all the things, and what you speak about on stage with the power, harnessing the power of the mind? How would you apply that within the context of thinking about reverse aging and longevity?
Yeah. Well, we're just now, actually, next weekend, I'm going to be at a biohacking event in Florida. I'm meeting with a group that's going to help us do some testing on that. I've not done my own testing, but Deepak Chopra did. And he's got a test where he took people back and had them live in the 50s. These were older people. And he actually showed through telomere studies and methylation processes that he reversed the aging process. And what he did was he took the stress out of the equation. The biggest reason we stress, we know that just look at our presidents. I would not want to be president at any age. They age exponentially. It seems daily they get older because of the stress and the burden they have with their job. And we see this all the time when people become self-employed, or they don't know how to handle stress. You know, but if you know how to handle and manage stress, we know that it doesn't really, I don't know of anybody who knows how to really truly reverse the aging process. I'm sure we're going to unlock that code at some point here because people are looking at it. But we do know that we can, and some people will say telomeres aren't a good way to, but it's the best way we have right now, or gene methylation that tells us, hey, are we methylating like a 16-year-old or a 30-year-old or a 90-year-old? And what we know is when you're practicing these things like brain tap, your body either reverses that process or retards it. It slows it down so that, you know, and the reality is that we're always rebuilding anyway. As we're speaking here, the time we spent together, we've changed 50 million cells per second. So our body has been changing at faster than the speed of light, you know, and most people don't know this one feature. We are biophotic beings, and they've proven this because in 2003, when they mapped the genome, you know, they said, hey, we mapped the genome, but they didn't. They only mapped 1% of it. Could you imagine graduating from college? You answer 1% of the question of the test, you'd say, I want my diploma. They would never give it to you, but they did. But in 2018, they finally have technology that knows what that 99% that they call junk DNA does. That 99% changes every 40 seconds based on your environment.
Wow.
So there's things like feng shui, which is the ancient art of placement. And you're just the flow of your environment is when you walk in, is it chaotic? Is it peaceful? Is there a good flow? You know, in one way we know that is I tell people when you wake up in the morning, what's your first thought for the day? Is it like, wow, this is exciting. What am I going to do today? Or is it, oh no, gosh, you got all this going on. You need to start training our brain, and it starts when we go to sleep. That's why the best thing you can do to reverse the aging process is to get the best sleep possible. And if you don't own the brain tap, then you want to start doing 4-8 breaths or something like that, which means you breathe into the count of 4, which is going to exercise the nervous system. So don't think of the brain as the only brain that's between the ears. We have 3 other brains. And actually, some people would say every cell has its own brain. You know, it has its own intelligence. But we have a heart brain. This heart brain has 40,000 neutrino cells. It acts like a brain. It thinks. It responds. They've actually shown that if you have a heart transplant, you'll start to crave foods that the other person craved when they had that heart. You'll start to think thoughts like they had because you're actually getting like a brain transplant, but it's just a small one. But that brain communicates twice as much to the rest of the body as the body does to it. And then we have our gut brain. And our gut brain has more neuron connections than the brain in our head. And that gut brain is the one that makes all those neurotransmitters that makes us feel good or bad. So if, you know, when you have gut feelings or if you're, you know, that's why when somebody is not mentally doing well, usually they have abdominal problems, they have digestive issues, you know, things aren't working quite right down there. And so when these 3 brains, when they're coalescing they're in a state of cooperation with each other, then we feel joy and happiness and love. And these are the natural states of the human condition. It's just that most people have been so far removed from them. They're like foreign, you know, it's like a foreign language to them. They don't know what those are. They think they're supposed to be fearful, afraid, and tired all the time. That's not our normal state. Our normal state is one of joy and peace and acceptance, not the other way around.
Right, right. Yeah, I've come to learn that myself also just a few years ago. Up until a few years ago, I thought that the anxiety that I felt, the sense of like feeling like I wasn't enough, and just kind of that inner turmoil and conflict, I thought that that was normal. And I thought that that was the world I lived in. So thank you so much for your work, Dr. Porter. Now I have 3 questions that I ask all of my
Sure.
speakers. Okay, the first question is, what is your #1 life hack for promoting your own longevity?
Well, besides brain tap, which I do, of course, every day, 2 to 3 times a day, I love doing my infrared sauna. I do that every morning. And I used to travel with it, but it became kind of a hassle. But when I'm home, every morning you'll see me doing a 30 to 40 minute infrared sauna session. And Of course, if you came to my lab here in BrainTap, we have 6,000 square feet of all biohacking equipment. So there's no shortage of what I love to do. And I actually get up typically around 4:30 or 5 o'clock, and I spend 2 to 3 hours just working on myself because, I'm 62 now and I plan on being around for a while and still in great health. So I want to stay healthy. So you got to put the time in. It's not going to happen by accident. You've got to plan, and I love it. I do. I also I was trained in TM, so that's a longer meditation process, but I do it with my brain tap on. I put on the Gamma series and I do that. And that's one I can do anywhere all the time, wherever I travel around the world. I'll still do that every morning, and I'll get my high gamma and get my GABA going so I can get that kind of mountaintop experience every morning and get ready for the day.
Wow. So you start off your day super naturally high.
Yeah. And I don't drink coffee. If I do drink coffee, I don't drink coffee first thing in the morning. I only drink it after 10 o'clock because I don't want it to interfere with my circadian rhythm or in the norepinephrine and cortisol levels of my brain the first thing in the morning. If you really want a high functioning brain, you want to delay that gratification of that coffee and get your brain to stimulate on its own.
Got it. Got it. Thanks for that footnote.
Mhm.
I have coffee just maybe 3 or 4 times a week. So I've gotten a lot better with that.
That's good. Yeah.
Okay. Question number 2. Where do you see the future of human longevity?
Well, I think people they're already moving away from some of the negative behaviors, but we're going to see that people are going to start, instead of it being a world of convenience, we're going to start seeing that people are going to start managing their time so that they can take care of themselves. Most people have exchanged time for uh, basically convenience, and that convenience is killing people. So I think we're going to see a lot of changes there. For instance, getting up in the morning, you're not going to use alarm clocks. You're going to wake up like with a room that lights up like the sun. It's going to wake up the cells the way they were intended, filling the mitochondria with energy and light. And your brain's going to be triggered, and you should have good music playing. And then the devices won't just measure what they're doing. For instance, one of the things we're working on is when a child's using a computer, if you saw what the brain does after playing a computer game, you wouldn't let your kids play it for more than an hour, and you would have them do like a brain tap session because it's like they did crack cocaine. They're so stressed out, even though they think they're having fun. But we're going to be and then we're going to have solutions for those problems, because the problem that we have in life today is not stress, it's capacity. It's how are we going to recover from that stress? So I think in longevity, there's not a longevity book out there that doesn't tell you that stress is the number one factor for aging. So we need to have better methods of doing that. And I think we're going to do that. And we're going to find that we're not going to have conveniences just to, give us sweet, fatty foods that make us feel good momentarily and then destroy our health. We're going to have foods that they might taste good, but I have a saying, nothing tastes as good as being healthy feels. So you want to focus on that long-term thing. And I think that's where we're going to see it more than anything. And I think we're going to see peptides becoming more a part of this. That's one of the supplements that I'm thinking is going to revolutionize the world. They've done peptide studies that they can target different parts of the body and actually regrow different parts of the body. So I think we're going to see some things that we've never seen, and it's not that far off. We're seeing it now. I think within 5 years, the lifespan of people is going to probably be 120, 130 before long.
Oh, wow. That is absolutely something to look forward to. Thank you.
Mhm.
Third question. What is one thought or act that takes you back to a childlike, playful state?
Well, for me, it's when I am out playing with my grandkids or something like that, and I get back into that kind of childlike feeling, and I'm always trying to recreate those memories. I was fortunate, even though there are 9 kids in the family, and I have one sister that believed we had this terrible childhood, but I don't remember it. So, but I think just being in action and moving, I'm kind of I love sports and I love action, just doing things. And I think just being around young people is one of the things I love. And especially, when you get out on the boat with my grandkids or swimming or doing something like that.
Right. Oh, that's it. It is there's something that when you are around the children, it makes you can't help but be playful with them, be playful like them, or be playful like you were when you were a child. It's like that child inside of you that wants to come out again, even as an adult.
Yeah, in my newest book that I'm writing right now called The Brain Fitness Blueprint, we tell the story of my grandkid's dog. They had an older dog named Lucy, and it was moping around doing things. So they got a puppy. That dog was about to die, but it lived another 5 years
Oh,
because
wow.
it had a puppy.
I had a
So, and I
companion.
think
Yeah.
that, when we put the elderly, used to be, there's no ancient tribe that kept the wisdom of the tribe with the youngsters.
Hmm.
Used to be the grandparents would raise the kids.
Yeah.
And now we put the grandparents in homes. We don't even talk to them,
Yeah.
and that's why they expire and die. They retire and expire. They need to have everyone needs a purpose. If you don't have a purpose or a reason for being, your biology will just say, okay, we're done.
Hmm.
We'll start over again next time,
Yeah.
or whatever.
Yeah. Well, on that note, Dr. Porter, thank you. And any parting words?
I always like to tell people, don't allow anyone else to define who you are. You're far greater than you've been led to believe and far more capable than others have led you to believe. So just think outside the box. You can't dream too big and you can't accomplish too much. Just be in the flow and take it as it comes, and life will be easy for you. It might not be enjoyable all the time, but it'll be easy because you're realizing that you have the capacity to handle it. Don't, and you do have that capacity. The old saying that God doesn't give you anything you can't handle. And I love it because there's a t-shirt that says, God must think I'm a badass. So that's the way, so just know that, just handle what comes and don't take too much, and just know that you got this, and handle it.
Yes, yes, yes. Now, our audience, I've asked Dr. Porter to offer you all a free gift so that you can experience his universe, his technologies, and his world. And Dr. Porter, what is that gift for our audience?
Yeah, you're going to share a link with them where they can get 14 days free on the app. And we also will give you a link so they can download the book Drive and Overdrive. That's a free book they can download. It's a book, it's a Kindle book, it's a real book. You can buy it on Amazon too if you want, but it's a book you can read on your mobile phone or your tablets. And that'll give you a little bit more background that we didn't cover here. It'll also tell you a little bit more about the history and where we think things are going. I wrote that book about 6 years ago, and it's been one of the most popular ones out there.
Amazing. This is all so exciting. Again, Dr. Patrick or Dr. Porter, thank you, thank you, thank you for your amazing work. And to our audience, please sign on, do the 14-day trial. It is truly a game changer. I mean, I can tell you that my memory, I mentioned earlier that I didn't think my memory could improve. Since I've been using BrainTap, I have noticed a profound shift in my memory, and I am surprising myself every day now. So the BrainTap is my go-to.
Thank you. Yeah.
All right. Yes. Thanks, Dr. Porter. And thank you, everyone. Much love. Mwah.